For me, it's interesting. This was a watch that I wore in the first film I ever did. And the film came out 2012, and interestingly, I got an email from my cousin in England, and he sort of attached a link to a watch thread, and there was a whole thread about what watch was I wearing in Urban Outlaw, and I go, how do they even notice what watch I'm wearing? Because to me, it never even occurred to me. And I sort of really had to think, there's that one scene where I'm driving the 66 911, and you see it on my wrist. And all of a sudden, it was this deep dive into what year is that Omega? It looks like early 70s. What reference is it? I don't know any of this shit. I just bought it because I like the look of it.
Hey guys, it's Cam from Craft and Tailored, and in this episode of The Details, we're hanging out with our friend Magnus Walker to talk watches, cars, and all things cool. So Magnus, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for coming over. Timing's everything, so.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that you're necessarily a watch guy, and part of our series is that when we talk about watches and things like that, typically there's auxiliary details that are conversations that are facilitated by a shared passion. My passion is watches. You have a lot of passion for a lot of things. Porsche passion, right?
Porsche, yeah. Some may say that.
So I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about watch collecting, why you like certain things. I think you have an interesting collection, and it's not your kind of stereotypical collection. I think you also have great taste in just things, whether it be Porsche or automotive design. I think you've got a really awesome eye for collecting that kind of stuff. And I read your book. It's really, really awesome. And I think you also have kind of a special connection to watches through your upbringing, kind of your childhood.
For me, I always say humans like to collect. Doesn't matter whether it's stamps, guitars, cars, watches, cameras, Hot Wheels, whatever it may be, right? For some reason, humans, I think, like to collect items. It brings back memorable moments, relives memories perhaps of a childhood, or maybe it's a goal-orientated. Growing up as a kid in Sheffield, north of England, my dad actually repaired clocks and watches, even though we never really had any sort of, fancy items. There were always clocks and watches around. As a kid growing up, I was surrounded by music, I was surrounded by art, I was surrounded a little bit by fashion, and obviously watches were part of my life, or timing devices, horological devices, whatever you may want to call it. I think the first watch I remember might have been a Swatch or a Casio calculator watch that I actually acquired.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, even though my dad worked on clocks and watches, it wasn't like he necessarily had his favorite. So for me, I'm just drawn to things that initially I like the look of, and then you sort of take a deeper dive into, does it mean anything, or purely it's a functional item, an appliance that does its job, tells the time. Nothing beats doing that, flicking your wrist and looking at what time it is.
It's interesting too, because I find myself, obviously I'm obsessed with vintage watches and kind of the element of horology. I think one thing that for me is interesting about time is it's kind of like an equalizer. It's something that it doesn't really matter like where you're at in the world. Time is just, it's
only 60 minutes in an hour, wherever you are and whoever you are and whatever you're doing. Time is the same for everyone.
And I'm sure that there's a lot of common crossover in details that ultimately facilitate an experience. Like, with cars, for example, you get into a certain car, it's the smell, it's the feeling, it's that kind of thing that I also feel in watches too. There's magic in kind of these things, especially in timepieces or cars or what have you, that, kind of change the way that I feel about myself within the world. And I think that that's the thing that I'm ultimately, obsessed with. And then, the small, tiny details. I mean, same thing with Porsche or with some of these watches. It's like you can, 911 is a 911, but there's so many small details and so many things that ultimately make them unique unto themselves. And I think that's something that I've been kind of interested in exploring and kind of talking about and learning about and sharing with people is, how can something be the same but so different at the same time?
Same but different.
Let's talk maybe Porsche a little bit. Why Porsche maybe to start?
I was 10 years old when I fell in love with Porsche. Dad took me to the London Rose Court Motor Show, White Martini Turbo on the stand there, and that was it. That was the iconic shape. That car looked fast standing still. When I think of Porsche, you know, whatever it is, 44 years later to this day, when I think of Porsche, I think of that 930 Turbo. So I suppose I always had this need for speed, even though I didn't grow up with a Porsche in the family. I had the poster on the wall. That was it. Love affair started at an early age, and you know, here I am 44 years later, and I got a bunch of these little Hot Wheels here and a bunch of real cars to my side. So for me, I've owned a lot of 911s. You know, it's no two are ever the same. They all sort of give you a different driving experience. And I like varieties. I basically acquired what I personally liked. I've never acquired anything that I thought was going to be an investment. My brain doesn't think of it in a financial term of, let me buy this car because it's going to be worth a lot more. And so yeah, there's a Porsche slice for everyone, whether you modify, race, restore. Porsche is the catalyst that brings people together.
I can be a Rolex guy, you can be an Omega guy, but we share this common bond of appreciation of those details. And I think the same thing with cars. I think this is ultimately learning and kind of having maybe a different experience or a different perspective. Like, I'm seeing new things in watches all the time, or considering a brand or a reference or a model that I maybe wouldn't have considered because somebody else is able to, you know, give me their perspective on it, and I might not have had that perspective. And I think same thing with, you know, with cars and you know, brands and things like that.
Good design never goes out of style. You know,
For
that's
sure.
one thing that is timeless. So to me, like, value, design, style, it's never been a price point thing. You know, for me, it's a desirability, but ultimately it has to be, am I interested in it? And whatever it is, it always starts with, oh, this looks cool, or that looks cool, or that's interesting, or what is it? Something has to sort of spark your interest, pique your interest. And like you say, you know, priorities shift, taste change, you know, horizons broaden. I like the look of them, and somehow I'm connected to them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the story there.
You have a watch that is one of my favorites, and I have one in my collection. Let's first talk about the one on your wrist. You know, Omega Mark 4.5, really interesting watch, interesting case shape, steel. Why did you get the watch? Did you just like the shape? Did you like the history behind it? Why this versus anything else?
For me, this was sort of, I suppose, the first serious watch I acquired. I don't even know when I bought it. It was probably 20 years ago. So for me, I'd always wanted an Omega. I suppose there was a little bit of a man on the moon thing about it. Like most things I own, I don't treat them with kid gloves. You know, they get beat up, they get dinged up. And to me, it's kind of like the cars. Nothing needs to be perfect. You know, I'm not a box and papers guy. That to me doesn't matter. It's the same with cars. You know, if the car happens to have the original motor, great, but it doesn't drive any better with the original motor. Some people, oh, it's a dress watch, right? I'm only wearing it on a special occasion. To me, this is a timepiece like a car. It's built to be driven, not put back in the box on the shelf or in your climate-controlled storage facility or whatever it may be on the velvet roll with the box and papers in the safe and all that stuff. I get it, but that's not what I'm about.
I think the watch that probably everybody knows most is your Porsche Design 1. And the thing that's interesting is Porsche, they were experimenting with early PVD. It kind of wears off, and I think the early versions, the cool thing about that is that it wears off and kind of leaves like this gray kind of vibe on the watch, and that only happens in the early ones. It's incredible. I love the design and a lot of history, and I think it's, you know, it's just awesome. You know, we could, you know, wax on about a bunch of different watches or cars or whatever, and they could vary in price point. It could be, you know, $200,000 plus Rolex Paul Newman, or it could be, you know, a cool Seiko, and the Seiko and the Paul Newman can be totally different, but kind of one and the same, and have just as much vibe and kind of feel. People, I think, in today's day and age, they associate price with like exclusivity or quality, which is like something that is like so funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's kind of like my mild pet peeve of paint to sample GT3 RSs, which on paper seem really rare, and then you go to a Cars and Coffee. You know, I went to one once and I counted 18 of them. And it's like 18 of them at the same Cars and Coffee, and half of those were lava orange. You go, well, this thing that's exclusive is not really that exclusive, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about variety, which sort of leads me to this one, which has got a lot of sentimental value because it was a birthday present from Miss Hannah, and it's my It's actually not my first Hoya, it's my second Hoya.
So I really like this time period for Hoya. This is a Hoya 2000 series chronograph. And what's interesting is Hoya is now known as Tag Heuer.
Right.
So what's really cool about this watch in particular, and there's some details that I really like about the 2000 series chronographs, is that it was kind of a transitional period for Hoya where they were ultimately it was eventually going to become Tag Heuer.
I mean, you can't think of a stopwatch without thinking of Hoya, right, to begin with.
Can't do it. Yeah.
You know, on the dash of the car, and then the timepiece on the wrist, and then of course, you know, throwing Mr. McQueen and Le Mans, and all of a sudden, you know, Hoya's always been cool, but now it's elevated to a certain different level.
And so this is a very transitional watch. The thing that is really cool too, from a design perspective, is that if you look at the date, there's, you know, these little date magnifiers on like the, they call it a cyclops. But what's cool is the date magnifier is actually in the dial. So from a design perspective, I think the company was like falling on hard times and trying to get product out to like kind of save their ass a little bit in that era in time. But even then, there's still design elements that are like really cool and thoughtful.
Details matter, right?
100%. The other cool thing is that this watch has the nickname of the football timer or the soccer timer. So they made two. They made one in this like PBD version, which was like, I think more of like a, I don't want to call it mil spec, but like more of kind of like an under the radar, more technical timepiece. And then they actually made one that was specifically designed to time a soccer match.
Ah.
So kind of
that
cool.
I didn't actually know.
That, like we were talking, like these things are kind of similar, but like totally not.
Same but different.
Yeah.
Similar but different. All right, I think it's time to go look at some Porsches. So
let's do it.
Let me show you a couple of my favorites.
I mean, this is one of the most iconic Magnus related cars right here. This is 277.
Yeah, my 71 911T. I acquired this back in 1999 at the Pomona Swap Meet, so I've owned it 22 years. The car turns 50 this year. This is the car I'm most associated with. It's the one I've owned the longest. It's the one I've done the most miles in, the most memorable moment. It's got all the character, patina, stories. And just like my watches, you know, it's an instrument. It's being used, it's being driven. It's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I have a lot of emotion and memories tied up in this car. I often describe it like my favorite pair of old shoes or favorite pair of old jeans. It just feels right. You can't walk into the Porsche dealership and buy a car, you know, that has a lot of character and soul and patina straight away. The only way you get that, really, I believe, is by using it the way it was intended. I had it in the LA River, which was something that I've always wanted to do. I've been in the LA River with various other cars, but I'd never taken 277 in the river. That banking's about 35 degrees of concrete banking in. It's the second Porsche I ever owned, and it's the one I've owned the longest. And if I'm only keeping one, this is the one. To me, it's special, and that's what matters, and that's why I love 277, really. So my collection sort of falls into a couple of categories: modified and then mostly stock. So Porsche only made 284 turbos in '75. That's the first US turbo ever sold. They all sort of look similar other than the colors, but no two drive the same. But most of what I'm sort of known for, I suppose, is modified cars.
Right.
This car is pretty special. This is the 310th 911 ever made.
Wow.
That is car number 310, the 310th 911 made. So this was one of the very early 911s delivered to Brumos.
This is where you kind of got your start a little bit with Serious Clothing.
Yeah, and so the Serious Clothing was, we outfitted everyone from Alice Cooper to Madonna. It was rock and roll. It was a great era of music and fashion.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to build a car that someone has seen before. I want to add my own personality
it's your own thing
onto it. And that's what's great about early 911s. They're interchangeable. Perhaps one of my top 5 favorite Porsches of all time, my 04 Gen 2 996 GT3. 996 aero kit car, sat next to it, the king of the hill back in 2002, 996 GT2. No one seems to worry about this style headlight when it's on a GT1.
Right.
But everyone hates it when it's on a base model Carrera 996. But to me, this car is 22 years old. I think it really is coming into its own. I think it looks better and it's aged really, really well.
Maybe the crossover between a car like this and watches is like, we have watches that are now becoming very collectible that would be considered the transitional models.
Right. This was the future of the iconic 911 that came about in 1999. And then I spoke earlier on about how my love affair with Porsche started as a 10-year-old, but the first Porsche I ever acquired was when I was 25, was a 74 911 slant nose conversion, probably 28 years after I bought my first one. So
sometimes you think you have something that you've outgrown or out-collected, and then you lose it and it sticks in your head and you're like, oh man, like,
gotta have it back.
It haunts you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so is that kind of maybe the inspiration behind this car, or did it kind of come up and you're like, I had one?
This one came my way and it turned out it was in Pasadena local. And I just like, it's kind of crazy, it's sort of not right, but I love it. And then when I checked the VIN number, it turned out to be not just a 74 911, which was the year of my first one,
right,
but it turned out to be a US Carrera. Front engine, mid-engine, rear engine, that is this room. So to most people, these are not necessarily what you think of when you think of Porsche, because they're not 911s.
Right.
And this was my first 928, it's a 78 Euro 5-speed sunroof delete. I love the 928, it's a great touring car. 1980 924 Turbo. This is Porsche's first front engine, water-cooled production turbo car.
Porsche interior.
Yeah, this is how it left the factory with the Porsche interior.
Cool detail here though.
Yeah, the knacker duct, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just really cool. I mean, it's
a whole lot of style, still an iconic silhouette, and this car, by my math, is 41 years old. The car next to it is an Al Holbert wide-bodied conversion. Al Holbert was a factory Porsche driver, raced Le Mans, also had a Al Holbert Porsche dealership back east. And then perhaps the holy grail of all 924s is the one next to it, the 924 Carrera GT.
Yep.
Porsche built 406 of those.
You see some shift in the brand, almost like, Rolex and Omega, where those watches were, I mean, like yours, it's a tool. It's a
right.
tool watch, right? There's the name of tool watch. It's something that is used for a purpose, but then ultimately these things that are built with quality for purpose, they kind of transcend into that luxury brand, and people are now looking at Porsche as like this luxury brand.
Yeah. I mean, Porsche's DNA, started with a 356 back in 1948. They've come a long way. 30 different 911s. Porsche has expanded beyond an enthusiast sports car brand into a luxury manufacturer that makes sports cars. Here's a pair of 914s. This is my sort of hot rod art car interpretation.
Really cool.
Kind of like we spoke about in the 911 room, adding my own personality, my own DNA to it.
I think there are guys that are specifically looking for this, but there's a lot of bang for your buck in these cars.
Yeah. I mean, there used to be a whole lot of bang for the buck. 914s are going up in value like everything, but still, great performing cars, really well balanced, great handling cars, and also just have a lot of character and uniqueness to them. That's what's great about Porsche is, they really stand out.
You're doing a cool series with Hagerty, which I think is an awesome idea. When you shared it with me, this series is called The Next Big Thing.
Yeah, it's called The Next Big Thing. It's on Hagerty. It's essentially cars that are on my wish list, or cars that I think might be forgotten, unloved, the underdogs, the up-and-coming cars. For me, it's just a way to meet fellow car culture people, drive some cars that are not Porsches, and the kind of folks at Hagerty decided we could make a show about it. It comes out once a week, and it's everything from like a Saab 900 Turbo to a Jeep Grand Wagoneer to a Lamborghini Espada. Younger kid, he's going to say Aventador, whatever the greatest, latest Lamborghini is. No one's going to say Lamborghini Espada. So that might be the affordable Lamborghini.
This is another outlaw 911.
Yeah, this is 67. At one time I owned 5 67S's. I'm now down to 2. This one's pretty unique. It was the first one that Rod and I did the louvered fenders.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, it's got a punchy 2.5 twin plug motor right there that's going to
center filler cap.
Center hood filler, R-inspired integrated front and rear turn signals.
Nice sticky Hoosier tires.
Yeah, it's got some sticky Hoosiers and a cool interior. And people say to me, I get people asking me questions all the time, everything from what's the best entry-level first Porsche to what's the best performance modification. And I always say, sticky tires, good brakes.
Mag, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
It was an awesome time, so thank you for coming on by.
Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.
And don't forget, get out and drive, pedal to the metal.